I'm Melanie Huckins. I'm the director of the St. Paul Public Library, and it's wonderful to have you here to listen to some really fascinating stories about this fine institution and our friends, the Shubert Club. It's their 125th anniversary also. So we're thrilled to have you here with us for that. I knew when I moved here, and I've been here a little over a year now, that St. Paul was a great place for literature and for music, and it has such a rich heritage, and I'm so proud, and I think I'm just at the right place in the right time. I'm here when it happens to be the 125th, and I can't be more thrilled about that. Holly's here to share just a few of her musings and memories of the Shubert Club's past, and please join me in welcoming Holly.
First of all, why am I dressed like this? You will see today a number of people in interesting costume. This one, I decided to go for the halfway point. There are people who are doing the 1882 bit, but I am more of a composite of all particularly the women that worked for the Shubert Club over the years. So this is mid-1940s. I had a lot of fun going through Shubert Club scrapbooks, and I came across a quotation from 1931, the Pioneer Press. This was 1931, just before the mutual 50th anniversary of our organizations. What the Public Library and Art Museum mean to the patrons of literature and art, the Shubert Club means to the lovers of music. This bold statement was actually more true then than it is today because, of course, there is only one, the Public Library in St. Paul. But the Shubert Club now has a lot of competition from other cultural organizations. But remember, we were one of the first. Well, we have grown today to be a major recital presenting organization across the United States. We do about 7 concerts here 7 concert series here in the Twin Cities. We have a Museum of Musical Instruments. We do an annual student scholarship competition. We also produce recordings, commission new music. We own a complete Indonesian gamelan orchestra that we loan out to a community group, and we publish books. The Shubert Club was named in honor of composer Franz Schubert. This was a fairly common thing in the mid-19th century to name an organization after a famous literary or musical figure, and I had the fun of tracking down a couple of still operating Shubert Clubs across the U.S. that share not any common traits with us mostly, although they were originally inspired by music, but they have the same quirky name. Yes, it's a quirky name, a historical name, and a confusing name because we aren't devoted exclusively to Schubert, nor are we a club. That's been out of date for more than 50 years now, but we love the name anyway. The group was started by wealthy women of St. Paul. Governor Ramsey's daughter, Marion Ramsey Furness, was one of them, who wanted to listen to and discuss classical music, and that meant, in those days, performing in their own homes for each other. But they soon started bringing in people from the outside to perform, excellent artists that were touring through this area, or that they induced to tour through this area. And then in 1908, they also decided to bring music more into the broader community by forming what they called an altruistic section, and they began presenting free concerts in factories and orphanages. Another big expansion was in 1972 when we started our Museum of Musical Instruments. 25 years ago, that's just a drop in the bucket historically, but the museum has become an important thing. I won't ask how many of you have heard of our Museum of Musical Instruments, but if you had been reading the newspapers 75 years ago, and if we'd had our museum, you certainly would have, because the papers were putting in an article about the Shubert Club almost every week. Looking through the scrapbooks, I can't believe that there's so much coverage. When a major performer came to town on our series, there would be at least 4 articles in the paper. First, a preview article before the person showed up, an interview with the performer while they were in town, and then at least 1, usually 2 reviews of the concert afterwards. And then every time we had a meeting or an announcement of something, it seemed as if something appeared in the paper about it. So I want to share with you a couple of headlines from the day. 2 changes made in rules on Shubert Club tryouts. Very specific, very esoteric, would not appear today. This one is from the 1930s. Opera star gives inside tips on attaining facial beauty. Rose Bampton, good singer and very beautiful. And one I came across from 1959 has become a sort of informal Shubert Club slogan. Shubert Club, not in a rut. Okay, but let's go back to where the Shubert Club and the library intersect. In the early days, the Shubert Club contributed various music books, printed music scores to the library to be part of its collection. They also stored some of their administrative materials, their study guides and other things here for their own use. And that went on happily until 1915, a date the library people will recognize as having been the big fire that destroyed a lot of those materials. But no hard feelings. 2 years later, in 1917, the Shubert Club put on a community production of the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta Iolanthe to benefit the library. The Education Committee reported that about 600 people attended. Expenses, costumes, set, etc., were just over $313. Ticket income, though, was about $327. Okay, a $14 benefit may not seem like much, but the report points out that this was an opportunity to show our desire to cooperate with the public library, which goodwill was heartily appreciated. The book, like my presentation today, tends to jump around a bit, dipping into miscellaneous parts of our past. And I want to give you a few stories, either from the book or from the scrapbooks. The book does have some behind-the-scenes information. It isn't all just, glory days of the Shubert Club, which continues still. But for instance, there's a little moderately discreet section on artist fees. There is also a little section on disasters or near disasters, always fun to read about from the vantage point of many decades, like having to cancel a major concert in 1918 because of the epidemic of influenza that banned public gatherings, or the fire in 1940 that destroyed our performing space at the People's Church just 2 weeks before a big concert. But there was a more amusing crisis in 1954 when soprano Elizabeth Schwarzkopf was scheduled to perform but missed her plane in Chicago and managed to get another flight that got in town very close to concert time. So the Shubert Club board president and her husband arranged to meet her at the airport, but they also took the precaution of calling the chief of police to see if they could get an escort to exceed the speed limit and get to the St. Paul Auditorium close to concert time. Well, that would be fine, but of course they couldn't do that in Minneapolis. So the board president and her husband picked up the singer, and there near Fort Snelling at the border, the police cars joined in, sirens blaring, led the cavalcade down to the St. Paul Auditorium. The soprano, knowing she was not really going to have time to warm up at the concert hall, said, "Do you mind if I vocalize in the car?" Well, sure, go ahead. So the board president describes sirens blaring on the outside, soprano warbling on the inside, driving like mad through the city of St. Paul. When they got to the concert hall, the soprano, cool as a cucumber, steps out of the car and says, "Fortunately, I have a dress made of that new modern nylon net. It doesn't need ironing." She whipped into the dress and onto the stage only 10 minutes late and gave a superb recital. I don't know if any of you might have attended a performance at the Midway YMCA in 1970. It took place in their swimming pool. Apparently the new work, called Water Whistle, was designed to be heard underwater, so people made their reservations for either the deep end of the pool or the shallow end of the pool, depending, changed into their bathing suits and got into position. The ushers doubled as lifeguards. Definitely not in a rut. Well, as I look back over 125 years, or the parts of it that I can see through the scrapbooks, I really feel proud of the Shubert Club and its role in St. Paul, and I'd like to close with a quotation from the Shubert Club president Florence Briggs back in 1918. She was talking about a period in World War I when the Shubert Club was encouraging community singing. She says, "Our music in the hearts of soldiers and civilians tones the system, heals the broken-hearted, urges action, restores balance, gives encouragement, injects pep, puts it over, and gives us the odds." Well, she was talking about World War I and community singing, but I like to apply that more generally to the Shubert Club as a whole and to the whole world of music. And don't forget, the Shubert Club is not in a rut.